Listen. September 24th, 1877, Shiroyama Hill, southern Japan. A man named Beppu Shinsuke is standing over his best friend with a drawn sword. His friend, Saigō Takamori, the greatest samurai in Japan, is kneeling in volcanic mud, bleeding from a gash across his stomach that he cut himself. Saigō's hands are steady. His face is calm. He is waiting for Beppu to take his head. 100 yards downhill, 499 other men are being torn apart by American-made Gatling guns, firing 200 rounds per minute. The sound is deafening. A mechanical roar like cloth ripping, but amplified 1,000 times. It drowns out the screaming. It drowns out everything except the wet thump of bullets hitting flesh. Beppu doesn't want to do this. His hands are shaking. But Saigō looks up at him and nods once. The nod says, "Now. Do it now before I lose consciousness. Do it while I can still die as a samurai." Beppu raises the blade. This isn't a heroic last stand where courage overcomes the odds. This was the end of 700 years of warrior tradition, killed by mathematics and machinery in less than 1 hour. This is the Battle of Shiroyama, and this is how the last samurai died. To understand why these men chose death over surrender, you have to understand what was stolen from them. Not their land, not their wealth. It was their entire identity. 1868. The Meiji Restoration begins. Emperor Meiji, a 16-year-old boy manipulated by progressive advisors, issues a series of decrees that shatter Japanese society. The samurai class, the noble warriors who have ruled Japan for 7 centuries, are abolished by imperial command. Just like that, a signature on a piece of paper erases 400,000 men's reason for existing. The edicts come fast. Samurai lose their government stipends, the rice payments that have sustained their families for generations. They are forbidden from wearing their swords in public. The daisho, the paired long and short blades that mark them as warriors, must stay home. Then comes the cruelest cut. Commoners, peasants, the people samurai once ruled over, can now join the new Imperial Army. The social pyramid inverts overnight. The samurai weren't being defeated in battle. They were being made extinct by legislation, like wolves in a world that no longer had room for predators. The new Japan wanted railroads and telegraphs and Western suits and factories. It didn't want men who lived by a code that said death was preferable to dishonor. Standing at the center of this cultural earthquake was a man named Saigō Takamori. Picture him, nearly 50 years old, built like a bear, 300 pounds of muscle and scar tissue. Saigō wasn't just any samurai, he was the samurai. A war hero, a philosopher, the military genius who had unified Japan under the emperor and crushed the last shogunate. He had built the Meiji government with his own hands. And now he watched that government destroy everything he believed in. The irony was crushing. Saigō had created the system that was now erasing him. He had trained many of the young officers who now commanded peasant conscripts. He had won the wars that made modernization possible. His reward was obsolescence. Among the men who followed Saigō was his nephew, Kirino Toshiaki. He was 32 years old, trained by Saigō personally since the age of 7. The training was brutal because Saigō loved him. 10,000 repetitions of the same draw cut until muscle memory erased thought. Meditation in ice-cold rivers, sparring until exhaustion, then sparring more. Kirino carried his grandfather's katana, a blade forged in 1640, folded steel with a perfect balance. The edge was so sharp it could slice a silk scarf dropped onto it. He had spent 25 years learning to use that sword. He could draw and cut in 0.3 seconds. He could hit a rice paper target in total darkness by sound alone. He was, by any measure, a master swordsman. In less than 4 hours he would die, without ever swinging that blade in combat. All those years of training, made useless by a bullet fired from 200 yards away by a 19-year-old farm boy who had held a rifle for only 6 months. That's what modernization meant. Saigō faced a choice every samurai faced: adapt or die. Most adapted. They became bureaucrats, policemen, farmers. They put their swords in closets and learned to wear Western clothes and bow to merchants. They survived. Saigō couldn't do it. For him, being samurai wasn't a job. It was a spiritual calling. He had famously written, "The way of the samurai is found in death." He meant it as philosophy. It was about to become literal. February 1877. Saigō raises the flag of rebellion in Kagoshima, his home province in southern Japan. The response stuns the government. 40,000 samurai join him overnight. These aren't random malcontents. These are trained warriors, men who would rather die than become clerks. For 8 months, they fight the Imperial Army. For 8 months, they lose. And not because they lack the courage or skill, but because they lack bullets. The rebellion becomes a rolling disaster. Saigō attacks Kumamoto Castle with 15,000 men, but the walls hold. He besieges it for 50 days, but imperial reinforcements arrive with modern artillery. He retreats north, but the government sends 300,000 conscript troops, farmers with rifles who barely know which end fires. The samurai discover something horrifying. Swords are useless against Sniper rifles that can kill at 600 yards. Courage means nothing when artillery shells explode overhead. Discipline can't stop Model 1874. Gatling guns. Battle by battle, the rebellion bleeds out. 40,000 becomes 20,000, then 10,000, then 5,000, then 2,000, then 500. By September 1877, only 500 samurai remain. Kirino Toshiaki is one of them. They are exhausted, starving, down to their last rounds of ammunition. They retreat to Kagoshima, Saigō's hometown, and climb a hill called Shiroyama. They are surrounded on all sides by an army that outnumbers them 60-1. The rebellion is over. Now comes the dying. To understand why the final battle became a massacre, you have to understand the ground. Every military disaster begins with terrain. Shiroyama isn't a fortress. It's not even defensible terrain by conventional standards. It's a steep, wooded hill rising 350 feet above Kagoshima Bay, roughly conical in shape, covered in dense bamboo forest and volcanic rock. At its widest point, the summit plateau is maybe 500 yards across. From above, if you could see through the canopy, it looks like an island in a sea of imperial troops. The samurai have dug crude trenches with their bare hands and bamboo stakes. They've piled volcanic rocks into low walls. These aren't fortifications. These are symbolic gestures. These are grave markers. Here's what makes Shiroyama a death trap: the mathematics of encirclement. The Imperial Army has positioned artillery on 3 surrounding hills, forming a perfect triangle. Each battery sits 1,200 yards from the summit, optimal range for their Armstrong cannons. The angle of fire is approximately 18 degrees upward, which means the shells arc high and then plunge down nearly vertical into the trenches. There is no dead ground on Shiroyama. There are no safe spots. Every square foot of that hilltop is covered by at least 2 artillery positions. The Gatling guns are positioned 500 yards from the main downhill approach, placed on raised earthworks that give them perfect fields of fire. From their elevated position, they can sweep the entire slope. A man running full sprint, adrenaline pumping, can cover maybe 10 yards per second. That means 50 seconds of exposure to cross the kill zone. At 200 rounds per minute, That's 166 bullets filling the air between him and the enemy line. The mathematics are elegant and brutal. The bamboo forest that covers the hillside looks like cover. It's an illusion. Bamboo stalks are hollow. A .45 caliber round punches through 6 stalks without losing velocity. The forest provides concealment, not protection. It hides the samurai from seeing where death is coming from, but it doesn't stop death from arriving. In some ways, it makes it worse. You die without knowing which direction to face. If you visit Shiroyama today, it's a peaceful park with walking paths and cherry trees. Tourists take photos at the monument. The hill looks small, almost quaint, like a place for a Sunday picnic. But in 1877, standing on that summit and looking down at 30,000 enemy soldiers assembling in perfect formation, with artillery and Gatling guns and rifles all pointed at you, it was Golgotha. Saigō Takamori looked down from that hill and realized something most generals never have to face. He wasn't standing on a battlefield. He was standing on his own grave. The only choice left was how to fill it. The technology mismatch was absolute. This is what modern warfare looks like. Not sword against sword, not skill against skill. Mathematics against flesh. 200 rounds per minute versus 2 feet of blade. And mathematics always wins. The samurai carried katana, 2-foot blades that weighed 2 pounds and required close combat to use. Their primary backup weapon was the yumi, a traditional bamboo longbow with an effective range of maybe 50 yards. A handful had outdated matchlock muskets scavenged from earlier battles, single-shot weapons that took 30 seconds to reload and frequently misfired in the humid coastal air. The Imperial Army carried Murata rifles, breech-loading weapons with an effective range of 600 yards and a rate of fire of 10 rounds per minute. Their artillery batteries had Armstrong cannons that could hurl explosive shells 3 miles. And positioned on the key approaches to Shiroyama were 2 Gatling guns, American-made rotary cannons capable of firing 200 rounds per minute. Let's be clear about what that means. A Gatling gun could fire more bullets in 1 minute than an entire company of samurai archers could loose in an hour. The .45 caliber rounds didn't just wound. At close range, they shattered bone, pulped organs, created exit wounds the size of fists. The weapon didn't require skill or courage. It just required someone to turn the crank. What happens when a katana meets a Gatling gun? Mathematics. The samurai had to close 500 yards of open ground under fire to use their swords. At 200 rounds per minute, the Gatling could fire over 1,000 bullets before a running man crossed that distance. The samurai weren't obsolete because they lacked courage. They were obsolete because they lacked range. Hollywood shows samurai deflecting bullets with swords, their blades moving faster than the eye can see. Physics shows .45 caliber rounds traveling at 1,000 feet per second, punching through silk armor and 2 inches of bone without slowing down. There is no contest. There never was. September 17th, 1877. The Imperial Army completes its encirclement of Shiroyama. The commander is Lieutenant General Yamagata Aritomo. Yamagata is 40 years old, a former samurai himself who chose adaptation over extinction. He wears a Western military uniform with gold braid and polished boots. He carries a saber he never uses. Here's the cruelest irony. Yamagata studied military strategy under Saigō Takamori. The master and the student are about to face each other across 500 yards of killing ground. Yamagata knows Saigō's tactics, his philosophy, his favorite quotes from Sun Tzu. Now he has to use that knowledge to kill his teacher. Yamagata positions his forces with cold precision. Artillery batteries on the surrounding hills, infantry in concentric rings tightening like a noose. the two Gatling guns covering the main paths down the mountain. He sends a messenger under white flag. The offer is simple: surrender and live. Saigō will be tried with honor. His men will be pardoned. Saigō refuses. He doesn't even dignify the offer with a response. He sends the messenger back with a traditional haiku poem that roughly translates to, "The cherry blossoms fall, but the tree remains." The meaning is clear: we will die. You cannot break us. Yamagata expected this. Therefore, he orders the bombardment to begin. For 7 days, Imperial artillery pounds Shiroyama. The mountain shakes. Trees explode into splinters. The samurai hide in caves and crude trenches, covering their ears as the world ends around them. But they don't break. Therefore, Yamagata waits for starvation to do his work. If the rebellion was a test of samurai combat skill, the siege was a test of samurai spirit. Could 500 starving men maintain discipline while being shelled into extinction by an army of their own countrymen? For 7 long days and 7 long nights, the world condensed into sound and terror. The whistle of incoming shells, the crump of explosions that made the ground jump, the screams of men torn apart by shrapnel they never saw coming. The samurai couldn't cook fires for fear of drawing artillery. They couldn't sleep because the bombardment continued through the night, random and relentless. They ate grass. They ate tree bark stripped from bamboo. They chewed on leather sword grips. Men died from infected wounds with no medicine. They died from dysentery after drinking contaminated water from bomb craters. They died when trenches collapsed and buried them alive. Hour after hour, day after day, the iron rain never stopped. Kirino Toshiaki spent those 7 days maintaining his sword. He couldn't fight. He couldn't train. He could only sit in a trench and polish the blade his grandfather had carried. He cleaned non-existent rust from steel that was already perfect. It was meditation. It was prayer. It was the only thing he had control over in a world where artillery shells randomly decided who lived and who died. Imperial messengers climbed the hill under white flags multiple times. Each time the same plea: surrender. Each time Saigō's response was the same calm refusal. He quoted the bushido code: "The way of the samurai is found in death." His men were living that code, watching it burn their bodies from the inside. On September 23rd, the 7th night, the bombardment stopped. The sudden silence was worse than the noise, the ringing in their ears, the absence of explosions. The samurai knew what it meant. The talking was over. Tomorrow, the killing would be direct. Saigō called his remaining officers together. There were maybe 40 of them left alive and unwounded. They knelt in a circle in the darkness. Saigō didn't give a speech. He didn't rally them with promises of victory or appeals to honor. He simply stated the reality. They had no food, no ammunition, no hope. One choice remained. They could wait to be starved out, reduced to skeletons and captured like animals. Or they could charge at dawn and die as samurai. The vote was unanimous. They would attack the Imperial Army at first light. All 500 of them, swords drawn. They would die on their feet, moving forward the way their code demanded. Kirino returned to his position and told the men around him. They nodded. No one protested. No one suggested surrender. They checked their swords. They tightened their sandals. They waited for the light. As his officers returned to their positions to wake the men, Saigō sat alone, looking east toward where the sun would rise in a few hours. He was 50 years old. His body was broken. He'd been wounded in the thigh by shrapnel days earlier and could barely walk. He knew he wouldn't make it down the mountain. He knew how this ended. He didn't pray. He didn't write final letters. He simply waited for the light. September 24th, 1877. 4 a.m. Saigō Takamori gave the signal. 500 men rose from their positions. They formed ranks with the precision of a parade ground. Perfect lines, perfect spacing. No one spoke. They drew their swords. The only sound was steel sliding from wooden scabbards, a whisper repeated 500 times. They wore no armor, just silk robes, most of them torn and stained with mud and blood. They looked like ghosts. Kirino Toshiaki stood in the front rank, 3 men to the left of center. His grandfather's blade was in his hand. The balance was perfect. The edge caught the pre-dawn light. For 25 years he had trained for this moment. His entire life had been preparation for a single, perfect cut. He would never make it. They began moving down the mountain, not running, walking, a measured, formal pace. This wasn't a charge. It was a procession, a funeral march where the mourners and the corpses were the same people. The only sound was their breathing, the rustle of silk against skin, the scrape of sandals on volcanic rock. Below them, in the pre-dawn darkness, 30,000 Imperial soldiers stirred in their positions. Sentries rubbed their eyes. Someone shouted a warning. Bugles blared across the valley. Drum calls echoed. Officers screamed orders. Conscript soldiers, most of them farmers a year ago, scrambled to their positions. They grabbed their rifles. They stared up the mountain at the ghosts descending toward them. The samurai didn't scream war cries. They didn't bang swords on shields. They walked in silence, and somehow that was more terrifying than any shout. Men who have accepted death completely are the most dangerous thing in the world. You can't threaten them. You can't break them. You can only kill them. At 300 yards, the Gatling guns opened fire. The mechanical crank, the ripping canvas sound of 200 rounds per minute tearing through the air. Mathematics became murder. The front rank of samurai disappeared in a cloud of blood mist. 1 second they were there. The next, they were chunks of meat and shredded silk falling to the ground. Kirino felt the man to his right simply vanish. A spray of hot blood hit his face. He kept walking. The second rank stepped over the bodies, maintaining formation, swords raised. This wasn't happening to 1 man or 10. This was happening to all of them. Industrial slaughter. Assembly line of death. The equation solving itself in blood. They kept walking forward. Imagine being in the second rank. You just watch the man in front of you torn apart by bullets moving too fast to see. You can feel the spray of his blood on your face. You have 400 yards to go. The guns are still firing, the sound like the world being torn in half. You keep walking. At 250 yards, the rifle companies opened fire. 1,000 Murata rifles firing in coordinated volleys. The samurai ranks shredded like paper in a storm. Men dropped every second, then every half second. The volcanic slope turned slick with blood. The Imperial soldiers manning the Gatlings weren't celebrating. Many were crying. They were killing men who had once been their heroes, their teachers, their fathers' commanders. Some had trained under these same samurai before the rebellion. They were killing the old Japan with their bare hands, and they knew it. But the Gatlings didn't cry. The Gatlings didn't feel remorse. They just killed everything in front of them. Crank, fire, reload, crank, fire. Kirino Toshiaki made it 200 yards. Farther than most. He was fast. He was trained. He knew how to move through terrain. The rifle bullet took him in the throat at 4:47 a.m. The impact snapped his head back. His grandfather's katana, the blade forged in 1640, fell from his fingers. It landed in volcanic mud. He dropped to his knees, Blood poured from his neck in arterial spurts. He fell forward, his hand outstretched toward the sword, inches away, unable to reach it. He died staring at the weapon he'd trained 25 years to master, never having swung it once in combat. His uncle Saigō, 100 yards behind, didn't see it happen. But he knew. He knew the mathematics. One by one, they fell. Then dozens at a time, then hundreds. The math was simple and brutal. 500 men. 200 rounds per minute per Gatling gun. 5 minutes of sustained firing. 0 chance of survival. The .45 caliber rounds don't just wound. At close range, they shatter bone, pulp organs, create exit wounds the size of fists. The samurai weren't being killed. They were being unmade, turned from men into meat, from warriors into scattered pieces of tissue and torn silk. They fell. They died. They kept coming. In the center of the doomed charge was Saigō Takamori, 300 pounds of broken warrior. He carried no sword. He could barely walk. The shrapnel wound in his thigh had turned septic days ago. His students held him upright, one on each side, practically carrying him down the mountain. He wasn't trying to reach the enemy. He knew he couldn't. He was trying to die correctly. He wore a simple kimono, unarmed, walking calmly as bullets tore through the men around him. Accounts describe his face as peaceful, not resigned, peaceful. He had made his choice. This was right action. This was the way. At 100 yards from the Imperial line, a bullet caught Saigō in the hip. He grunted, then another hit him in the stomach. His students felt his weight go slack. They lowered him to the ground. His closest retainer, Beppu Shinsuke, knelt beside him. Their eyes met. No words. They both knew. Saigō bowed his head formally. Beppu drew his sword. Saigō sat in Caesar position, his back straight despite the bullets still flying overhead. He placed his hands on his thighs. He took a breath. Saigō cut across his own abdomen with the short blade he'd kept hidden. The pain must have been absolute. Before he could pull the blade across a second time to complete the ritual, Beppu brought his katana down in a perfect arc, severing Saigō's head from his shoulders. It was mercy. It was honor. It was the end. For a moment, even the Gatling stopped firing. Someone in the Imperial ranks had recognized what just happened. The words spread through the line like electricity. Saigō is dead. Officers shouted to cease fire for a second, just a second, out of respect. Then the orders came again, and the guns resumed. The man who built modern Japan died because he couldn't live in it. With Saigō dead, the charge lost its structure. It became a brawl. It became a slaughter. The surviving samurai, maybe 200 still on their feet, broke into a run. They screamed now. The discipline shattered. They were dying anyway, so why not scream? They closed the distance. 50 yards, 40 yards. Close enough to see the faces of the conscripts behind the rifle barrels. Close enough to see the tears. One samurai, his name lost to history, made it within 30 yards and raised his katana overhead, preparing for the strike he'd trained his whole life to deliver. A rifle volley cut him down before the blade could fall. He collapsed in a heap, his sword clattering on stone. He died inches away from what he'd been born to do. The Imperial soldiers, seeing their enemy finally within range, fired wildly. They couldn't see through their tears. They couldn't steady their hands. But at that distance, aim didn't matter. The bullets found flesh. They always do. If the rebellion was a test of samurai combat skill, the siege was a test of samurai spirit. They had passed both. They had maintained discipline under impossible fire. They had died moving forward, refusing surrender. But they failed the test of history. Courage couldn't defeat technology. Honor couldn't stop bullets. Mathematics always wins. By 5 a.m., the mountain was silent except for the moaning of the dying. 500 samurai had charged down Shiroyama Hill. 0 reached the Imperial line. All 500 were dead or dying within the hour. Imperial Commander Yamagata walked the battlefield after sunrise. His boots squelched in mud and blood. He stopped at each cluster of bodies, looking at faces. When he found Saigō Takamori's headless corpse, still sitting upright in death, he removed his hat. Witnesses report he stood there for 5 minutes, silent, before his shoulders began to shake. He was weeping. He had killed his master. He had killed the old world. When the sun fully rose over Kagoshima Bay, it illuminated not a battlefield, but a graveyard. 500 bodies scattered across 400 yards of muddy slope. Most had been killed by bullets they never saw, fired from weapons 200 yards away. Many still clutched their swords. Beautiful blades, some of them 200 years old, folded steel that could cut through bamboo like water. Useless against bullets. Museum pieces before they hit the ground. Kirino Toshiaki's grandfather's katana lay in the mud 200 yards from the Imperial line. A soldier picked it up later that day. He cleaned it. He kept it. That blade survives today in a private collection in Tokyo. It has never been used in combat. The Imperial soldiers didn't cheer. They didn't celebrate their victory. They stood in formation, silent, staring at the carnage they'd created. The conscripts, peasant farmers a year ago, stood above the bodies of the men who had once ruled them. The social pyramid had inverted completely. The Meiji Restoration was written in blood on that hillside. The numbers tell the story with brutal clarity. 500 samurai dead. Imperial casualties during the final charge, 0. Not 0 dead and some wounded. 0 casualties of any kind. The samurai, the greatest warriors in Japanese history, hadn't killed a single enemy soldier in their final hour. They had charged machine guns with swords and died exactly as mathematics predicted they would. The Gatling guns sat smoking, barrels red hot from sustained fire. The battlefield smelled of gunpowder and blood and shit and death. The volcanic soil had turned to mud, soaked through with enough blood that it pooled in the artillery craters. The birds had stopped singing. When news reached Tokyo, 600 miles north, the government declared victory over the rebellion. Newspapers printed the official statement. The Satsuma uprising has been decisively crushed. Order is restored to Kyushu. The words were correct, the tone was wrong. In the streets of Tokyo, people didn't celebrate. They mourned. Saigō Takamori had been a national hero, the man who unified Japan, and the government had killed him. Worse, they'd had to kill him. There was no other way to move forward. The old Japan and the new Japan couldn't coexist. One had to die. Now it had. Photographers arrived at Shiroyama within days. They captured images we still have today, faded and brown, but undeniable. Samurai bodies laid out in neat rows for identification. Swords collected in great piles. Hundreds of blades that would never be drawn again. The hill itself, scarred by artillery craters, trees shattered into splinters. You can find these photographs in Japanese archives. They don't show honor or glory. They show what industrial weapons do to human bodies. The Satsuma Rebellion, from first shot to last, killed 6,843 samurai and wounded over 6,000 more. The Imperial Army lost 6,403 dead, mostly in earlier battles when the fighting was more even. But Shiroyama itself was a one-sided massacre. 500 to 0. The numbers don't lie. Mathematics murdered honor. The Meiji government moved quickly to control Saigō's legacy. They couldn't risk making him a martyr for future rebellions. Within weeks, they began the rehabilitation. Saigō wasn't a traitor, they said. He was a tragic figure, a man of honor caught between two ages. They buried him with military honors. They built monuments. Within 12 years, they officially pardoned him posthumously and declared him a national hero. Yamagata Aritomo continued his rise through the military hierarchy. He became a general, then a field marshal, eventually Prime Minister of Japan. He modernized the army, built the bureaucracy, turned Japan into an industrial power. But those who knew him said he was haunted by Shiroyama for the rest of his life. He kept a photograph of Saigō on his desk until the day he died. The surviving samurai from the rebellion, the few hundred who weren't at Shiroyama, were pardoned within a few years. They integrated into the new society. They became policemen, teachers, bureaucrats. They survived by becoming what Saigō refused to become. No one judged them for it. Survival isn't cowardice. But here's the irony that Saigō couldn't have predicted. The bushido code, the way of the warrior that died with him on that hill, didn't disappear. It metastasized. The Imperial Army that killed the samurai began to embrace their code in the 1890s. They taught bushido to conscripts. They romanticized suicide charges. They glorified death over surrender. By the 1930s, the Japanese military was more fanatically devoted to bushido than the actual samurai ever were. Officers carried swords into battle. They taught that surrender was disgrace, worse than death. They led suicidal banzai charges against machine gun positions, just like Saigō's final attack, and called it honorable. The ghost of Shiroyama haunted Japan through World War II. Kamikaze pilots were spiritual descendants of the men who charged the Gatlings. The code that was supposed to die in 1877 instead became the official death cult of an empire. Saigō had said, "The way of the samurai is found in death." He was right, but that death infected Japan for 70 years, leading to Iwo Jima, Okinawa, and the atomic bombs. You can draw a straight line from Shiroyama to Hiroshima. The samurai died, their code survived, and it killed millions. This is why the last samurai film changed the ending. Hollywood gave the samurai a meaningful death, a charge that moved the emperor, a sacrifice that changed minds and policies. The truth is harder. The samurai charge at Shiroyama changed nothing. The government's policy didn't shift an inch. Technology had already won. The old world was already dead. Saigō and his 500 just refused to admit it. The samurai died for honor, but honor doesn't stop bullets. They died for tradition, but tradition doesn't defeat telegraphs and railroads and factory-produced rifles. They died as samurai, and in that narrow sense, they succeeded. But Japan moved on without them the next day. Today, if you visit Shiroyama, there's a monument at the spot where Saigō committed seppuku. It's a simple stone marker surrounded by an iron fence. Tourists take photos. School children on field trips lay flowers and bow. The hill is covered in cherry trees. In spring, the petals fall like snow, coating the ground in pink and white. It's beautiful. It's peaceful. It's a lie. The truth is in the museum at the base of the hill. You can see the photographs from 1877. You can see the Gatling guns, still operational, the mechanical death machines that ended an era. You can see what industrial warfare does to the human body. Most visitors skip the museum. They prefer the cherry blossoms. Shiroyama teaches us that courage is not enough. Discipline is not enough. Honor is not enough. The samurai had all three in quantities that most humans can't comprehend, and they died anyway. Progress is not moral. It doesn't care about beauty or tradition or 700 years of culture. It just is. It moves forward. You adapt or you're crushed. The samurai chose death over dishonor, but dishonor would have meant life. Their sons could have grown old. Their skills could have been preserved, even if only in dojos. Their culture could have adapted and survived. Instead, they chose extinction. Was it brave? Undeniably. Was it stupid? Also, yes. Listen. It's September 24th, 1877, 4 a.m. A samurai named Kirino Toshiaki is preparing to walk down a mountain with his grandfather's sword. In 1 hour, that sword will be lying in the mud, and Kirino will be dead, his throat torn open by a bullet fired by a farm boy he never met. But here's what we didn't tell you at the beginning. Kirino knows. They all know. This isn't a desperate gamble. This isn't a last stand hoping for a miracle or assuming their courage will somehow overcome mathematics. This is ritual suicide with 500 witnesses. They're not trying to win. They're trying to die as samurai. And in that, at least, they succeeded. The mathematics of murder were perfect. 200 rounds per minute, 500 yards, 500 men. The equation solved itself exactly as predicted. The world moved on the next morning. The trains still ran. The telegraph wires still hummed. The factories still churned out rifles and artillery shells. The Meiji government continued building the Japan that would defeat Russia in 1905 and conquer half of Asia by 1942. But on a hill in Kagoshima, for 1 hour, 500 men held back the future with nothing but swords and will. They lost. They knew they would. They charged anyway. September 24th, 1877. The day mathematics killed honor. But honor's ghost would haunt Japan for 70 years. Make of that what you will. If you made it this far, you're a true history enthusiast. Please verify your subscription now. It really helps the channel keep these forgotten stories alive. Let me know in the comments. Were the samurai brave or foolish? Is there honor in dying for a lost cause? Or is survival always the wiser choice? I'll be reading your thoughts below. Check out this next video on the screen about the Battle of Shiroyama, where we explore another moment when traditional warriors faced modern weapons, but with a very different outcome. I'll see you there.